Hello and welcome. Colin Gibney here. Happy Christmas to you, and I hope you're all doing well. I'm sorry that I haven't been around much. I've been very busy. Work, work, work. What I want to do today is I want to discuss a video that was made by Aewar, um, conspiracy graduates Aewar and Wooden Nichols. They call it Starforts. They are lying. Yes, people are lying and people are not looking into things properly. So this starts off with a
Huge.
Okay,
Is that
explain this one to me, historians. Explain that to me, and why does it go underneath
look at that.
this
What is that over top of
mud
it? Oh, we
flow
need to go in deep on
mountain?
this.
What the hell?
okay. It starts with a really bad mistake by Campbell and um, Burney, um, not looking into things properly. Um, I just want to say from the get-go, I like Campbell, I like Aewar. Um, you know, people have their merits. Uh, however, I agree with Aewar on quite a lot here. People really have to be careful about what they say and what they research. It's an ongoing problem. This community, people look at photographs and say, "Oh, this looks like this and this looks like that," and then while they're saying looks like, it's been taken by their audience as is for fact, and they're not. People never go back and say, "I looked at this photograph yesterday and I said this about it or that about it, and I am completely wrong." So it's time to man up a bit here. So yeah, in the introduction of this, I just want to say that I am not an advocate for the of the Tartarian Empire hypothesis. I never have been, and I've never mentioned it in any of my videos. I'm also not completely au fait with lost tech and Antiquitech, as it's become known as. Aewar mentions grifters here, people doing this for money and just misleading people. I don't believe I've misled anybody, and I have not earned 1 cent from YouTube. I have no Patreon. No one buys me a coffee. No one donates. No one pays a subscription. I don't have merchandise. Something I've considered having a bit of merchandise, but we'll see. But to date, I haven't taken a cent for what I've done. As I said, I like Awar's work, and I like well, I like some of it. I like some of Campbell's work, and I've tried to help Campbell out by clarifying some of the things about the Earth stars, but people see what they want to see and do what they want to do. I don't think that the Tartarians are responsible for the star forts either. I also know that there has been a huge military involvement that has seen many stars developed and built upon. And there may indeed be stars that are 100% military star forts. However, I don't believe that is the case for the majority of them. So I'll just get the audio back here, and as Gay Byrne would say, roll it there, Colette.
Tang I probably mispronounced that, but it's in the Netherlands. It's one of the more impressive ones.
Okay, straight off, he starts with Bourtange, to pronounce it correctly, in the Netherlands, and he says it's one of the more impressive ones. That's actually a matter of opinion, and I think I can sway people's opinion a bit, because here is Bourtange. It's a 5-point citadel, to use their vocabulary. In terms of being spectacular, it's got a nice design. It's 5-point with a few auxiliary points and some nice canal work around it. However, when you take the ruler to it, you will see it sort of has an overall dimension of 580 meters. We say 600. This lake isn't anything spectacular, according to Aewar, as we'll see. So the whole thing would fit. You could fit most of it comfortably in a circle with a radius of 300 meters. And I like to take a point-to-point measure. We've got a point-to-point measure of just under 200. We'll call it 200 meters. So, what does that? How does that compare as being one of the most spectacular? I can literally point you to hundreds that are bigger. If we just go up the road to Naarden, and we take a measure here, you'll see that the radius is 600 meters. So it's twice the size. We've got an overall width, say, of 1.2 kilometers. So a far bigger, more intricate site. And again, I think this is far more spectacular than Naarden, based on size. I know size isn't everything, but with size in these projects, large engineering projects, it's very important. So just bear with me now a moment. Yes, if we want to have a look at something that is really spectacular, we go to have a look at Copenhagen, Denmark. Here we have a citadel, point-to-point measure of 300 meters, so considerably larger again. And the citadel fits within a city surrounded by these are colossal structures running all the way around. They would have run down here. There's a remnant of the canal work there with the fun park built on top. There's more remnants. It would have run all the way around back to the citadel. We give you a measure here. You've got a circular, a radius here of 1,500 meters, almost a mile radius. So this is vastly, vastly more complex and vastly bigger than Bourtange. And not to mention there are other points of great interest further out, but I'm not here today to discuss that. So yeah, we'll go back to what the boys were saying.
You know, all this earthworks, and as you can see here, almost like a perfect star. And you'll note here there's a windmill, and there's the windmill there. And that's it from an aerial shot. So you can see the geometry of this thing's really impressive. And you can see why people will be like, well, what is this? And why would it need to be this shape? And what did it do? And the Tartarian advocates, and even myself, have claimed that this is an ancient, advanced, free energy remnant of an old...
Okay, I've never claimed that in any of my videos. I've contemplated the idea, but I've yet to see proof. And all I've been doing to date is presenting the evidence, and I don't see evidence for free energy here or pretty much anywhere. So, yeah, we go on.
world. That's it again. You can see the windmill. And there's a little village here, Bourtange. People live there now. They still live there today. Last aerial shot of it.
But you managed to find a photograph of this same location from the 1960s, and the spectacular features it shows today are not present.
So this was a bit of a shock to me, but this is an aerial photograph in the 60s, 1960s. And it's the same place. And there's that windmill. And you can see the outline here of that.
Yeah, there is no doubt this is the same location in the 60s. The question you should be asking yourself is, how did it end up like this? You kind of brush over it. How did it end up like this?
Star formation, but it's completely different. And that's because the original star fort geometry and earthwork was constructed centuries ago. And then it was just...
Okay, you heard him say it. It was constructed centuries ago. Okay, let's see if we find a contradiction to that. That'll come later. So bear with.
fell into ruin, and they changed the landscape and, you know, carried on with life. But
So, brushing over it, he says, fell into ruin, they farmed over it and got on with life.
in the 1970s, 1977, I think, to be precise, they started a restoration project. So that's just over 40 years ago. And this is in the 60s.
Okay, so he's saying that it's a restoration project. Will he contradict that later on? We'll see.
A map. This is what it looks like, this area, Bourtange.
Yes, that's what it looks like in the 60s. I found a map too. Here's what it looked like in 1657, which is very similar to how it looks today. Or this from 1742, which is also very similar to how it looks today. So just keep that in mind as well. This is how it looked in the 60s.
And today, you can see they've changed it.
And that
So they changed it to how it looked before.
means there would still be people alive today who remembered this restoration project.
Yes, there are people, I'm sure, still alive who remember this restoration project, and it will be very interesting to talk to them. So maybe do a bit more research and talk to these people and see what they say. But I'm fairly certain by the visual evidence that it's not really necessary.
These are just some shots from the 60s that I found of what the area looked like before restoration or reconstruction, if you like, of the Star Fort. Nothing special, pretty standard, right? So
We're now going into how difficult his research was. So we'll let him go.
I wanted to find some photographs of this reconstruction because I couldn't believe it. And I did a lot of Google image searches, and I really struggled. I might have found one or two very small thumbnails. And the lengths I had to go to find these photographs, it took me ages. I had to go onto the Dutch archive, so it's not in English, and look through. So, Bourtange, do a search for that. 400 results. But what they do, they don't show you any thumbnails. So I had to actually go through and click each one and look at it and to find these photographs, which I found. So this is another aerial shot. They're starting to restore this. And when you look at these lines here, just to compare it, here that they're very rounded, the lines in the 60s shot. But here they're getting that sharpness back because they're doing earthworks. And it's just some close-ups. Again, you can see the windmill of just what the earthworks look like. So these embankments are just slopes, and it's all being squared off and neatly arranged. And the one thing to note about these images is that you'll notice it's very quiet construction scene.
Okay, it's a very now. This is you're no better than the rest of them. You're looking at an image and you're saying you're coming to a conclusion about it. Do you know what time of day this photograph was taken? Were they actually working at the time? Who else? What's on the other side of this? Here, have a look at this for a moment. Look, there's a building site. There's some houses being built. But there's nobody there. Does that mean they built themselves? Did it happen quickly? Did it happen slowly? Here's another one. Oh, look, the house has been built in brick. There's nobody around, so it must have built itself. Yeah? Am I right or wrong?
You see a few excavators, Jason.
Okay, you see a few excavators. Let it be known that an excavator like this can do in a quarter of an hour what 100 men could do in a day. These things are beasts by comparison to a man and a shovel. Now, I'm not belittling what men can do with shovels. I've got great admiration for what has been done manually. But there's no comparison.
PCBs or whatever. There's not loads and loads of people because they didn't need it in the late 1970s and 1980s. It's not a big project. And it must have been a bit of a weird.
So it's not a big project. It started in 1977, and we'll have a look at when it finished a little bit later on, if I don't lose my train of thought.
Time actually to live here with all this earthwork going on, all the vegetation just ripped up. There's that windmill again, mud everywhere. And I think they had to move this at one point. You can see here, even from above, you can see all the tracks from their excavators and trucks. Just another shot. Here's a color photograph. You can see the windmill. And you can see just a couple of carpenters, and they're making a center, again, for an arch. Basic bricks and wheelbarrows, a lot of earth.
But Aewar, where are they firing the bricks? You can't have bricks if you don't fire them.
Yeah, it's true. You can't have bricks unless you fire them. Here's another shot of it. So, the tunnel, the bricks are on. All this earth. Again, just a couple of guys doing it.
Okay, so what Aewar is doing here is he seems to be belittling the work that was done on this restoration project. And it just takes a couple of guys judging from photographs. Yeah, I'm just going to touch back on what he said. It started in 1977, so we can go back. Just bear with me now a sec. There are so many places to be looked at. Okay, so it started in 1977. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the historical imagery here, and we'll take it back here to 2007, even before here. Now you can see there was something here, and then it changed. So that means they were still working on it at the time of this photograph, which is from 2007. So they're not finished yet. Let's say that they are finished. We're in 2007 now. That's 30 years of working with excavators, machines, a small fleet of dump trucks. They look like tractors and trailers, tipping trailers, and they have been moving tons and tons and tons of material around to give us this little lake feature. So that gives an overall. So we say it's finished there because it seems to be finished soon after. 2011 looks finished. So we just say for the good of it that it finished at 2007. That's 30 years of work to go from what the picture he showed to how it looks today, using machines. And well, he said just a couple of guys, a couple of carpenters, but I'm sure it was more than that.
That's another shot of it. A few guys digging around, excavator, earth mover there. You can see the windmill.
Panchromatic film, details in the sky.
Yeah, so you don't get any vanilla skies now. And we've got cars, so it confirms that it's, late.
Yeah, exactly. It does. It confirms it's late 70s. And if you run this registration, if you look at this registration,
70s.
This format of registration in the Netherlands was from 1978. So bang on the ball there, late 70s.
Another shot of it, the windmill you can see here. Land shaping, all this grading. There it is again, you got your windmill. A lot of mud. And you'll notice as well as we go along, these little trees, they're planting trees. Because obviously they've dug everything up to restore its former geometry. Little culverts. So another shot of that culvert there. So there'll be a tunnel through one of these embankments. And again, you can see it's all taking form. So another colour shot, and you can see in the distance, a couple of these earth movers.
Okay, see, again, belittling it. Just a couple. See how much stuff they're moving, and these guys do that by hand. Get out there with a shovel and dig around water and see how you get on and how long it takes you.
Couple of guys. It's not a busy construction site. With these modern earth movers, it probably wouldn't take that long. And again, a lot of little trees because they're planting. Little trees. Again, not a busy site, but a few guys there digging and
A few guys there, yep, digging.
moving the earth. couple of trucks, little trees.
So it really is no big deal, right? 30 years? No big deal.
That's what it looks like today. So you can see here in this photograph, you can see all the trees, how they've grown and what they've done. Don't know about you, Wooden, but does this look like an old world, ancient site? It's
Does it look like an old world ancient site? Does it matter? It is. Remember this? This 1657. Yeah, it is lovely.
lovely, it's quaint, but it's not that special, you know?
Ah, it's gorgeous. It's
But I thought you said it was one of the more special ones.
pleasant just looking at the photos and kind of imagining what it'd be like to wake up there in the morning and maybe go for a nice little jog.
Yeah, walk the dog. And this is the early 80s.
So they built a dog park. You know, you see what you do see what's going on here. He's constantly been belittling this.
It's pretty much done. You can see the trees are growing. So it didn't take long. But again, it wasn't
Okay, well, we have photographic evidence from Google Earth saying that that it took 30 years at least.
a full-on project, but a slow one because people live there. You know, you can't just turn everything into a construction site. And that's it today. So you can see actually this body of water here is not actually there yet. They continued to work on it and kept slowly chipping away at this project until the 90s. So why are star forts all over the world? And what were they? Were they actually forts designed for military purposes, or were they cymatic free energy generators or healing centers? And I used
Or maybe none of the above. Okay, we know that they have been used as forts. Some of them were built exclusively as forts. Only some.
to think they had something to do with energy, but then you discover ones like Bourtange that are modern constructions, and you start
It's a modern construction. 1657. It's a modern construction. Thank you, Aewar, for clearing that up.
looking into them a lot more, and you realize that there is actually an abundance of evidence that they were used for military purposes. So I'm going to have to keep this basic, and we'll have to go back to the Middle Age.
Yeah, I agree. They were, not all, used for military purposes. Of course they were. They surround towns. Towns and cities all over the world are built on them. So of course they were used as defense.
Ages to the medieval castle for this to make sense. In the Middle Ages, with the medieval castles, they were always constructed high up on hills.
Okay, here we go with a Wikipedia. Well, I don't know if it's a Wikipedia quote, but Wikipedia paraphrasing for sure. Never say never, and never say always. Castles were always built on hills. I don't think I have to show you any proof to prove to you that castles weren't always built on hills.
Vantage points, and they emphasize high walls, and that's primarily because the main weapon was the bow and arrow, and these were tremendously hard to lay siege to. So for instance, you can't just run up here. That would exhaust your forces. Your primary way of attack is going to be at the entrance. And what they would do is perhaps bring big ladders with them to try and scale these castles. But all the while, people could just open fire from these vantage points down on the people coming. And another thing that they emphasized was moats. So again, it makes it even more impenetrable. If you wanted to get close to one of these walls to try and scale it, you'd probably have to swim through a lot of water.
Okay, we've got this is a valid point. The large amounts of water around a site, excuse me, makes it very difficult to approach. So water was used quite a lot, not everywhere. A lot of people say that star forts were always surrounded by water. We don't quite have the proof to back that statement up. However, where there was water, and this is an important, makes access to them very, very difficult. Can you imagine being a soldier from any era, having, either wearing leather or armor or chainmail and trying to cross a moat without getting shot? Not so easy.
which slows you down, and all the while from the top of these battlements where these little holes are, soldiers inside the castle could just open fire and rain arrows down on you. And there's a lot of evidence that bow and arrow was used in our history. There's a lot of archaeological evidence as well.
You are such a whore for his story.
History is pet. And yeah, so when you go to castles, you see a lot of openings like this, and these are for arrows. Most castles have these, and this isn't something that has been added retrospectively. You can tell by the masonry most of the time as well. What a thin opening like that would do is mean that the enemy below couldn't get arrows through it, but the soldiers within could take shelter and shoot through these little gaps down below. But then you get the cannon, the invention of the cannon. And what the cannon does, it renders the castle and the arrows in a way obsolete. Bit like DVDs would render VHS obsolete. And it's good to remember that everything moves slower back then.
So the cannons were invented in the 13th century, we're told, and they would have spread fairly quickly. There is a correlation here in the dates and the official story. However, I question the dates of the star forts. If they claim that they started in the 15th century, I think they may have been around a bit longer. So, moving on.
Then, and that includes warfare. Men had to journey by, boat, on horse, on foot, and carry all their equipment with them. So it wasn't like playing Call of Duty with machine guns and it all moving quickly. It was more like playing chess, slow and calculated, slowly chipping away at your enemy. And sieges would last years. And we have all these pictures of the cannon, and these are 19th century photographs. And you can see the cannon is a well-established thing. And they'd have cannons on boats, cannons on their forts. Just show you some of these. Got our posing by all these cannons. And they're on wheels, so these are siege cannons. So you could wheel these up to forts and fortresses and shoot at them to try and enter. So we have all this evidence that the cannon, just like the bow and arrow, played an integral role in our warfare history. And the thing is, you can test these today. There are sites where you can go and fire a cannon, and they do.
Yeah. So we've got good photographic proof. We've got good physical proof that the cannon was a real thing. There's a lot of people saying that cannons weren't weapons. I've seen cannons being fired. We've just seen one being fired here. What I will say about cannons is that they're dangerous. That you wouldn't want to be in its way. They're not very accurate. If you watch this clip, I can't give you the reference for it. I have watched this clip, but I'm sure if you type firing a cannon up here in the search box on YouTube, that you will come across this clip, and you'll see that it's not the easiest thing in the world. It's slow and calculated and not very reliable.
Work, and they are powerful. And what that meant was in terms of the castle is that you can see here from above, the castle walls were always very thin. They were tall, so they couldn't be scaled easily, but they weren't the thickest walls. And a cannonball, which is a huge, solid piece of metal that was
Okay, emphasis on the huge. Well, they weren't all huge. They're Google cannonballs, and you see some of them were the size of golf balls, tennis balls, shot puts, um, which I wouldn't consider huge. I'm not saying that they didn't do damage. They did. They could. But do you see how he's using language and emphasis on certain things? Onward.
fired, with a lot of force, that would smash through these walls, especially if you were repeatedly hitting that wall. It wouldn't last that long. So the cannon rendered the castle obsolete as a fortification, as a defensive measure. And as a response, they developed the bastion fort, or otherwise known as the star fort. And these are lower, the walls, but because they're lower, they could make them thicker. And that's why you get
Let's just have a quick look here. Let's have a look at low walls. Okay, low walls. Explain, please, Aewar. Explain Malta, Valletta here. Explain these low walls. I mean, how many stories are you talking here? It's not matching what you're saying. Yes, there are some, but it's not all. Low walls. Low walls is what you say? Yeah, not necessarily seeing it that way. So onward.
a lot of earth behind these walls because when a cannon hits it, it's reinforced by a lot of earth behind it. So they can't be easily broken and an opening made with the cannon. And also, where the moats were a bit thinner before with the castle, suddenly the trenches and the moats were a lot larger. So the reason, and wider, and the reason they did that is because they lowered their walls. It was easier to scale a wall, but there was a lot more distance you had to go to get there, which slowed you down, and by that point you would have been taken out. And you can see here, the walls are a lot thicker and reinforced by all this earth. They also emphasize sloping sides and sloping earth. They call it glacis. And it's the same in the a lot of the masonry, these walls slope out. There's a shot there. Got a slight incline to them. And that, again, was to reinforce them. When a cannon hit it, because of that glacis, it would kind of absorb the shock more and deflect it. And here you
It's also a good way of building a huge wall. Can I just give you another example of some? If we just go here to Rome, we can pop down here and have a look at some walls. So this slope, given that the walls are so incredibly massive, it makes sense for them to be to have this form just to support themselves. So conveniently, it can be said that cannonballs will be deflected by said walls and said slopes.
You can see the walls are reinforced by earth behind. So if boats, like we showed those 19th century photographs, if boats came along with cannons, they're not going to be able to destroy these walls as easily. And you can see here the evolution from those little slits and battlements where they would fire their arrows. We've now got cannon holes. So the soldiers within would have cannons here, all around, protecting from Navy ships that are coming to attack. Paul Cook, in his 5-minute introduction to Star Forts, states that cannons weren't invented until the 13th century. But then he uses Bahrain Fort, this one, which clearly has that bastion Star Fort pattern. And he looks at Wikipedia and he says, because this fort dates back to 2000 BC and the cannonball wasn't invented until the 13th century, they must be lying, and that these bastion forts were not invented and developed in response to the cannon. But when you look into the history of Bahrain forts, you realize that, yes, it's correct. It's been a fort since around 2000 BC, but it's gone through multiple iterations. And in the 16th century, the Portuguese took over, and it became an important military installation, and it gained its currently identifiable shape. So the Portuguese upgraded Bahrain Fort into the bastion fort we see today, or a lot of it. And that's evidence that military forts change according to the development of military technology, but the sites and their location, they remain, because they remain key locations for defense.
Are there any illustrations of what it would have looked like before the modification?
Okay, so Nichols has just asked, are there any illustrations of what it looked like beforehand? Well, let's see.
Occurred?
I'm sure there are. There's a lot of archaeological digs.
I'm sure there are.
Because a lot of it's been, they destroyed a lot of it and reused the masonry. So there's a lot of foundations that they've dug up over the years. It's quite interesting. So I think it's quite an important one for archaeologists. Another way that...
So, no, there are no illustrations of the older fort.
The cannonball especially rendered the castle obsolete is in its rounded turrets. So
okay, here we go again with paraphrasing Wikipedia. We're on to the rounded turrets. Listen to this.
Notice with the castles, they're always rounded like this.
Always rounded. Okay, just bear with me a second. Sorry, this is taking way longer than I had anticipated. Castles, always rounded turrets. Always rounded. Castles, always rounded turrets. Always rounded turrets. It's not always rounded turrets.
A bit like this. But this naturally created a weak spot or a blind spot. So if an enemy could get here and stick close to the wall,
Okay, how is an enemy going to get there with all this water here? This is the blind spot fallacy.
none of the soldiers up on the fortification could actually shoot him because you can't get an arrow or a cannonball round a curve.
But you couldn't drop a brick off here, or a stone, or a cauldron of molten tar. As you've seen any of those old movies, or oil, even boiling water, stone, just drop them on his head. That'd be fairly effective, wouldn't it?
So these were blind spots, and the bastion upgraded to get rid of those blind spots. They call them dead zones or blind spots. So if you're standing here,
I would call them dead zones because they would be places that you'd be likely to be dead.
and you wanted to shoot them, it's either going to miss or hit because it's curved. It creates a blind spot. And then what that means is the enemy down here can slowly chip away at the fortification and break an entry. The bastion fort changed it. So these are called bastions, these triangular points. And you can see here, if there's a person that's gone there to the blind spot, well, suddenly he's not protected anymore, because if there's someone standing here,
how did he get there? And he wasn't protected in the first place.
they can shoot and hit him. And even if there's someone standing here, they can shoot and hit him. So these no longer offered enemy protection to run up to a turret and try and hide and take out the masonry and make an entry. They were always exposed. And that's what that point did.
That's really fascinating, because the earliest Star Fort conspiracies that I started hearing about regarding these not being forts and hypothesizing how they couldn't have been used for military wartime never discussed any of what you shared here.
Well, yeah, and I didn't know either till I looked into it. You can see, if you're here, you do leave yourself open to fire. There are no blind.
Okay, yeah, so this goes on a bit, as is the response video, but if we take a quick look at what they're saying, is that if you have this shape, you no blind spots, and you can attack your enemy from left, right, and center. However, it doesn't really matter the shape. This is where it's a fallacy. The shape doesn't matter. If you've got a moat, you've got full access of directional fire. Your enemy isn't going to get close to you if you've got adequate men, and if they do get close to you, all you have to do is drop something off the edge on top of them. It can be a star shape, it could be a heart shape, it could be a triangle, or it could be just one big long line. You try approaching something like this, you're wide open. When you get to the moat, you're slow and wide open. It doesn't matter the shape. Really, it doesn't. It's about the scale. Big building, big area, lots of different ways to shoot cannons, guns, muskets, arrows, rocks, cauldrons of tar or oil. It really, this no dead zone thing has to stop.
Spots anymore. And even if you went head on to the gate of this fort to try and get in, there are so many positions suddenly with the Starfall where you can be attacked, like the front here, from the sides. You actually stand no chance. What you come to realize with the Starfall is that actually when you play around with it and you look at all the potential ways you could try and get into them, a successful siege, you realize actually how impenetrable they are. So for instance,
yeah, so I just showed you that with this, if you're big enough and you've got a moat, you just can't get in. Okay.
Again, you've got these wide moats. So say you've breached in here, you're the enemy, and you're in the moat. That's slowing you down. At which point you can be shot at from here, from here, from here, and from over here. Multiple places you can be taken out. Again, if you try and find a blind spot here and hide, you can be taken out from here, from here, from there.
Or somebody could just drop a brick off the wall onto your head. Really? Moot.
From there.
I was going to say one could simply avoid the moat by traveling that thin aisle by the waterfront, but upon further research of Tilbury Fort, the example you're using, there's a map with these letters which represent quick firing emplacements and gun lines.
What the Starfall did is...
Oh yeah, so that must be true. If you want to research further into Tilbury Fort, forgive me, I have to do this. Okay, this is Tilbury Fort. What does it look like? Looks like a star fort. But it looks like it should be, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 points, and it looks like there should be a fifth. Okay, the geometry suggests that it should have a fifth. I'll just show you this. This is supposed to be a map of Tilbury from the 1660s, but it's not Tilbury Fort. It's one that's across the river. It's this one or this one. It's one of the blockhouse forts. It's not Tilbury Fort, which on this map is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pointed, which matches why. Where's the fifth point gone? Can there have been? Remember, these things are huge. That would represent. That would represent a huge amount of erosion. Actually, I think I was. There you go. It probably, if the others are anything to go by, it would probably have looked like this. So there would have been a lot of erosion here, over 100 meters of erosion. And again, you can do this for yourself and see that there doesn't seem to have been that rate of erosion or quantity of erosion in the time frame.
Create a really impenetrable fortress. If someone's there, they've got you. Another one there, they've got you. You stand no chance. And that really was the point of them. That's why they were satisfied with making the walls lower as well, because to even get close to these walls, to try and scale them, would be a feat, you know? And this is all done by the
So, oh yeah,
cannon.
okay.
And the cannon can only shoot in straight lines. And you're wheeling your cannons up. But all the while, all these men up here, all the cannons up here, cannons within the walls, it really would be, you wouldn't last long.
Then the mystery, I feel like, for the Tartarian advocates would be, why are they all over the world? How did they all know to build this way?
If suddenly you have, you know, one country or state that's upgraded its military, that's using the cannon, and have got these new forts, no one else is going to stand a chance. So they either have to upgrade, which means build bastion forts, or they would probably be invaded, you know, taken over, and then the occupier would build bastion forts to then protect their new land. So that's why they're everywhere. It's a bit like why DVDs are everywhere, you know, or why they were everywhere, because they replaced the VHS. And now we've got streaming, DVDs are disappearing. And it's the same with anything. You know, as technology advances, it renders the technology before obsolete. This is an interesting one, actually, because I don't know if they built one like this. They probably did, but you can see they can become so complex in terms of these outer bastions. They do have all very technical names like Raven.
This is actually, as far as I know, this is just an illustration. However, there are sites that were built like this. Now, can you imagine the work that's involved? Say that this was actually built. Can you imagine how much work is involved here? Okay, no problem with a few men and a couple of JCBs or a lot of men and shovels. Bit more to it than that.
Technical names like ravelins and half moons and crown work and all that, but we won't go into that. We'll just keep it basic. But again, if you're lucky enough to get here, you literally stand no chance. And this down here could be a moat or just a ditch. And most of them did just opt for ditches. They didn't need moats. But you really don't stand a chance sieging one of these unless your army is huge. And I'll talk about that. What's interesting as well is this is a document from the 1700s. And you can tell, again, like I think under research when it comes to bastion forts has led to a lot of people speculating and thinking that they could have been something else, like energy generators. But when you look at the documentation and the planning and whatnot, you know, bomb. You've got these defensive measures here, these blinds. You've got a cannon. Yeah, it's filled with military terminology, trenches. And it says here, a hexagon fortified.
Okay, there seems to be a mix of things going on here. You do have military termination, bomb, cannon, blind. These are all small mobile things. Doesn't mean it's man-made necessarily, does it?
With all kinds of outer works together with a manner of carrying on the trenches of approach. So
Okay,
again, it's all about siege warfare. And you've got your batteries here, the cannons. And all these different cannons would be wheeled up and where they could be shot.
Again, he's just going on with these lines, and I guess I showed you. It doesn't really matter what shape you are, as long as you're big and you've got some water around you, a decent moat or trench, you're fairly safe. You don't need to be fancy, complex shapes, expensive shapes to make. Yeah, again, we can draw lines everywhere. It doesn't make it so. Okay, sorry, this is very important here. See this. This is, if you were a military engineer, this is what you would do. You would take a piece of paper, you would take a ruler, a compass, and you would draw your fort. Notice it's perfectly symmetrical. However, when you look at forts, they are rarely symmetrical. Why would you draw on a piece of paper something with three sides of one length and two other lengths on two more sides? You wouldn't. You would draw five sides of 200 meters or 200 strides or whatever measurement. It'll be the same.
A big coincidence. I mean, there's literally no evidence that these ever worked with any kind of high energy. And, some do from above resemble cymatic patterns and stars, of course. But I think it was Static in the Attic that pointed out that cymatic patterns emanate from their center outward, forming a kind of symmetry, whereas the majority of bastion faults are actually asymmetrical.
There you go. Thank you, Aewar. You've said it. They're asymmetrical. That's right. The majority of them are completely asymmetrical. That doesn't dismiss this theory that they, if you like, grew from the inside out. Because there's nothing on the outside of this to resist. Imagine you had a mountain here or a seam of harder rock. If it would maybe shorten the side, it would change the form. So let's not dismiss this one yet.
There are a few that are symmetrical, but most of them are not. They don't actually, when you really compare them, look or resemble cymatic patterns. And also as well, a lot of the people claiming that they were originally for energy, they sort of say that there's a bit of hiding in plain sight with the word battery. On here, for instance, this is called a battery. And they say, see, it was to store and generate energy. But battery is a...
Okay, not me. I never claimed this, so I can't comment on it. Although he's right. But battery means two things. It means battering, and it means an electrical supply storage device.
Everyone has to upgrade, otherwise they're going to be invaded and then they're done. But also as well, and I think a couple of others have pointed this out, I think Static, but they're always located on the coast.
Okay, listen to this carefully. They're always located on the coast.
By rivers,
or by rivers.
Surrounding the cities to protect the city.
Are surrounding the cities to protect the cities.
Or on key trade routes.
Or on key trade routes. Basically, anywhere there's a town. It doesn't make sense what you're saying there. Every town is... Now, this is what I'm saying. Every town is built within and on a star fort. As much as it kills me to call them star forts, it's what I'm using their vocabulary, but every city has been built within a star. I can show evidence to support this. Again, if you go back to one of our old favorites, Valletta, what you see is this is either sculpted or molded out of the bedrock. You cannot tell where masonry ends and bedrock begins, and all along the lower levels and all along the bottoms there are entrances, troglodyte dwellings, caves, doorways, passages. This is call this a huge lump of rock with underground cisterns and tunnels, passages, etc. It doesn't really jive that it was built around the city, but the city was built on it. So I just see what the guys are saying.
Always in these locations, which suggests again a defensive measure. And you might think that, like, oh yeah, but why? You don't have to enter a country by the river or the coast, but you do. Without airplanes and.
Yeah, again, I think we can go back to Malta to show this. Malta is a little island in the Mediterranean Middle Earth, and its approach to Valletta is here from the sea. Yes, there's a certain amount here, but the most imposing defenses are facing inland on all sides. Here we go here. Running all the way around here. Again, the sea is behind. And here. And yep, running around. And this is fairly typical of what you see.
You are traveling by boat or on horse or on foot. So these star forts and bastion forts were going to be in the key locations where people could enter territory. And also as well, I mean, the bastion fort came into invention in the 1400s and went all the way until the 1800s, the late 1800s. So that's 400 years of this type of fort. So they are going to be everywhere. They are. That 400 years is a very long time.
Having watched some of the Tartarian advocates, there was this example brought up where individuals like us were requested to explain of such anomalies with this specific star fort.
We found one that was just an imprint and it had a mudslide going over the top of it, like a mountain, like a hill, right? The geologists would say it was there for thousands of years. Literally, the star goes underneath it. This big float.
Okay, this is absolutely bad judgment by these guys. I'll get it for you now. Now, because a lot of people have been using my KMZ file, I was one who called it Nowhere Kazakhstan because there's nowhere close by at sea. 60 kilometers from what the nearest civilization I can find. Also, you can see in this video later
So just
on
going on top of this.
is this red line, which I used to show the elevation profile, and you can see, yes, it's sloping away. It's not going over. Not a great job there, lads. And while you make a mistake, you shouldn't be ridiculed. You should just man up and admit your mistake and maybe investigate if this is covered with 2 meters of silt, which is what another source says, that there's a covering of 2 meters of alluvial silt on this site in Kazakhstan. And again, you could question why the fifth point got washed away when that would suggest a huge change in the landscape in far shorter than geological time should allow. It's where there are questions to be asked about this site.
Star.
Wow.
All right. So okay, great. You explain. You think you can tell me how they got bricks and they built one star? Well, awesome. Explain that.
So I guess you could say in response to that thing of they're always by the coast and whatever. So you could probably say, well, this 1846, by which time the site at which it had been constructed was realized to have been chosen unwisely. The water level in front of the fort had dropped, which eventually led to erosion, causing.
So the water level dropped, which led to erosion, sort of is a bit backwards. If the water level rose, the erosion will be worse. So I think it'd be worth questioning why there's such a dramatic change in the landscape here in a relatively short space of time. And we'll go on a bit more.
See, when you're in 3D and you look at mountains, they're raised. But yeah, you can see it's dried up.
Tell me again, people, how there's no mud flood and no star ports across the realm. Moat in the desert, but look at that flow literally coming down on top of it.
Where's the closest water?
Explain that to me. So we know that the mud flow would have filled in most of the canals. That's why we get things flooding now.
It's a well-known thing, but it's dried up. So it was a fort on water or by water. And as this history shows, there were other forts all around. Again, defending territory. And again, there is a lot of evidence that, you do see the cannon being used in 19th century photographs. And then as you go on, you see the cannon turn in even more advanced, evolving as a weapon. You see that throughout the 19th century and beyond, to the point where they're getting very big and very powerful. And suddenly you get this. And this is when the Star Fort, the Bastion Fort, and siege warfare is rendered obsolete, because suddenly you can shoot missiles. With the invention of the explosive shell, you can shoot missiles and drop bombs like this. And now there's no need for a Bastion Fort anymore. So what we've got now is a situation where they've either fallen into ruin, they've either been dismantled, in some cases. They're...
What's interesting about some of the star forts like Warsaw and Dresden and Malta is that some of these sites have had some of the most intensive modern bombings that the world has seen, yet the star formation is left relatively unscathed. So it doesn't really figure. Yes, some of the smaller sites have suffered, visibly suffered, but even modern warfare can't touch some of these sites. Even if you were to nuke Valletta, you would still not. You would still see the form of it.
Masonry's probably been recycled and reused elsewhere, or they've been preserved as historical sites. And they're not covering any of this up, because if they were, then they would never have allowed the reconstruction of one of the most visually impressive ones,
Again, not the most visually impressive ones. It's a small scale. As star forts go, it's small. Yeah, it is visually impressive, but it's not one of the most.
Bourtange. And the fact that they actually had to reconstruct that just shows that it just was obsolete. There was no need for it anymore, and it was over. But they restored it. So you can literally see the progression of military weapons and engineering and the forts that were there to defend against each weapon. And again, if they were not invented or intended for military purposes, then why did the French army in 2020 build a bastion-style fortress in Africa? And the reason they did it, it says, where only sparse vegetation grew 2 months ago, there is now a camp whose defense system is based on the proven concept of a star-shaped stronghold. The French troops that were helping out in Mali.
Okay, seriously, look at this thing. It's a scratch on the ground with done by excavators. It's not. It's nothing like one of our major star sites. I mean, there's a truck sitting here. This is. I can't measure this because it's a photograph. I give it 150 meters, being generous. It really isn't anything significant. And again, as I said at the beginning, there are sites that are like this, probably 100% military, but absolutely nothing special.
Africa, they were defending against mass attacks from ground guerrilla style terrorists in a way, and they needed to not have any blind spots. That's why, then as now, the bastions at the corners of the fort eliminate blind spots and permit defensive fire from protected positions. So they've done them in recent times when it was needed to protect against that ground on foot guerrilla sort of warfare. When you go onto Reddit, the cultural layer, and see what they're saying about star forts, there's a quotation here. It said, many of them, the star forts, are known, but most such fortresses are not known, not only by historians, but even by people who live in close proximity to them, and even directly to them. Such stars were discovered in large numbers due to the wide distribution of aerial and satellite images of the Earth's surface. Moreover, it turned out that forts exist in the most unexpected places, in which, according to historians, nothing ever existed at all. But this is just a word salad with no...
Well, it's not actually a word salad. This last line, I admit, is wrong. It may be wrong, but I have had people commenting on my videos saying that they weren't aware that they lived on a star formation. I know that I have found locations that I had no idea were star formations where I had been. I am embarrassed to say that I visited Malta as a child, and I had no idea that it was a star fort. What else? Yes, this is true. Also, that it is thanks to Google Earth's image aerial photography archive that I have been able to see these. So it's not exactly word salad.
citation, because that's not true. Because if you look into the historical journals and articles, there's one here that was published in 1950 called Forgotten Bastions Along the Spanish Main.
So here we go. It was published in 1950 called Forgotten Bastions. So they were forgotten. Point?
forgotten bastions. So they've been investigating and looking at this stuff and writing about it for years. They're not hiding any of this. It's not that the historians don't know anything about them and the history books have just written them out, because that's just not the case.
Yeah, Reddit user having trouble finding information about history, I would definitely not consider to be a reliable source.
No, that's their, but that's a lot of the sources are coming from these Reddit chats or stolen history, which is pretty much just an extension of Reddit, and then feeding into YouTube. So what Bourtange kind of made me realize is that the majority of these star forts it's pretty much just an earthwork. And a lot of the time it's just ditches. Some of them were filled as kind of canals, like star-shaped moats, like a castle moat. In terms of the earthwork on most of them, it's not that big of a job. Well,
Okay, again, he's getting on with belittling these. Moating and canal works are major. It's hydro engineering, and it's not easy and not to be taken lightly. I would challenge anyone to make a 5-pointed star with the points 300 meters apart and surrounded by a canal. It's not just mounding up earth. Bear with us.
See, that's a modern construction. But you can see here, if we just go through some of them, these ones have masonry, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But you can see they are just trenches, tiered trenches. This is very similar to Bourtange canals, like star-shaped moats, like a castle moat. In terms of the earthwork on most of them, it's not that big of a job. Well, obviously, that's a modern construction. But you can see here, if we just go through some of them, these ones have masonry.
What's a modern construction? Don't say I didn't get that.
Masonry, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But you can see they are just trenches.
Again, belittling, just trenches, simplifying it, no bother.
Trenches. This is very similar to Bourtange, and you can see.
Yeah, we had a look at this earlier, and it's very similar. It's way bigger, more complex. Think about what you're saying, Aewar. How would you do this? How would you go about this without excavators?
Again, it's just trenches.
Just trenches. So easy. Should have known. Again, here, just trenches.
One similar to Bourtange. And also as well, I don't know how many of these have actually been restored in modern times. I can't imagine that all of them have been kept in shape, so there probably has been a lot of restoration.
Exactly. I would say that the majority of them haven't been restored, and that's why we can't see them. And just because they haven't been restored doesn't mean they didn't exist. You go on to show lots of old maps yourself.
Similar to what we just saw.
I think that's the major issue with all Tartaria-based research is every subject and topic needs to be on a case-by-case basis. And on the topic of a case-by-case basis, let's discuss Nosa Sinoroja de...
Oh, I love this one. Yes, again, I have to ask you to bear with me. Okay, this is what they're on about. Okay, this is beautiful, and despite what he says, the masonry here is top notch. It is not by any means straightforward and simple. And again, I remind you, look at the scale of this. Taking smaller measurements, it's 300 meters by 200 meters, and that's not including this beautiful matching pedestal that it's sitting on. And you're not addressing the issue of these holes. These holes are about 2 meters across. What was their purpose? Just as a matter of interest. Okay, we just go on a bit.
In my opinion, this is one of the more impressive ones. Because although you still have these trenches, which are fairly, that's doable, and all the masonry, which is doable, what's particularly impressive about this is
It's doable. Of course it's doable. It was done. At what cost and over what time period and how exactly? I think it's just straightforward.
the earthworks. And you'll notice here on these sides, these lines coming down. I'll zoom in. It's not that great quality, but you can see these lines and these edges. It's over there and there. Now, when you look at this one from above, that's what it looks like. That's a very impressive earthwork. And this took 30 years to build in the 1700s, I think.
Yes, it took 30 years to build. We know this. Who said? Prove it.
But this is impressive. And you're probably thinking there's no way. All those centuries ago, how did they do this? How did they move that amount of earth? Because we've just shown that Fort Bourtange in the Netherlands was actually made in the late 1970s. But of course,
Okay, you heard it there. Direct contradiction from what he was saying earlier. You heard what he just said. Sorry.
Bourtange in the Netherlands was actually made in the late 1970s. But of course, we had in the Netherlands was actually made in the late 1970s.
Made in the late 1970s. Nice one, Aewar. And going back here, need to open your eyes a bit more. This is beautiful and it's spectacular. But what about this? Just south of it, the entire town. How do you think that was done? Yeah? Look at that. Did you notice that? Did you not notice when you were looking here at this, that this was right beside it? And that this one was below it? And that there was an aqueduct going into it? So, if this took 30 years to build, how long did this take to build? And who did it? And how? Yeah? And this was built in the 70s. That was built in the 70s. The 1570s? The 1470s? Which 70s are you talking about? Seriously, man.
But of course, we had modern earth movers and equipment. So we'll deal with the earth moving in a second. But when you look at these structures, if you're arguing that it was impossible for people to manually make enough bricks centuries ago, you are arguing from incredulity. If you're making claims that it's impossible for humans to manually move megalithic or exceptionally heavy blocks of stone, you are arguing from incredulity. And it's the same if you're claiming that it's impossible to carve incredible stone structures by hand. It's the same with quarrying, stone splitting, moving trees, carpentry, earth moving and earthworks. It's all possible manually. This is the Central Asia, and it's the stans, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan in the red there. I want you to remember that because in the Middle Ages, this was called Tartary.
Okay, this sounds like a very mainstream counterpoint.
Tartary, or Tartaria. And it was a European blanket term for Central Asia. But as you can see, the Caspian Sea's there,
Okay, get on
Tartary.
with it.
And that white bit there is the Caspian Sea. In the late 1930s, Soviet Russia commissioned the construction of a great canal. It's called the Great Fergana Canal. And as you can see, it runs through these stans, or what was formerly known as Grand Tartary.
Okay, so what the point that is being made now is that this canal, 270 kilometers long, was built in 1939 by 160,000 local farm workers.
The canal is 270 kilometers long. And when you look into this canal and its construction in 45 days,
So
there's a bit of history here. It says
we're now trusting Soviet Soviet history, Soviet historical records. Wasn't it Stalin that wanted to completely erase like so much stuff? And are the Russians not known for wanting to claim that they did stuff that they mightn't necessarily have done? And now we're on this canal and we've got photographs and we've got video of it being made. Let's see.
building a canal in the 1930s. It's probably not correct to call them Tartarians, but it's more correct than what the Tartarian advocates say.
1930s were on celluloid film, so these are not the long exposure cameras. So that's why you don't have people blurring. That's why you have nice crystal clear images.
Exactly. And to motivate, it was a very positive. It wasn't like the gulags. This was a positive thing. So everyone collectively got together to do this in 45 days. And they had these musicians blowing these horns to keep people's spirit up. I mean, it's crazy when you look at it. But here it is. It's a lot of people digging and moving the earth. And you can see here how they're moving earth and transporting it. None of this is modern equipment. They did it old world style. 270 kilometers. And also, there's footage of it. You can see here just how enormous it is. Like, look at all the way. They're like little ants.
Okay, so what we have here are 270 miles of canal and 160,000 workers. And yes, it does exist. The thing is, I would propose that this was like Bourtange, that the canal already existed. It got filled in with mud, and it was just restored. I think that's what you have. What's happening here is that you got a because to build a 270-kilometer long canal in 45 days from scratch, really, I think even a lot of the mainstream people are going to say, I think you're stretching it there a bit, guys. You Soviets, those Russians.
This is where the Tartarian advocates and the ancient aliens and the lost high-tech arguers, this is where they can get their baselines for. It's not impossible. Digging and moving Earth is not impossible manually. But I suppose the argument would be, well, 160,000 people to dig that canal. That's a lot of people. What about back in the day, the population numbers? So the star fort as a form comes about during the Renaissance, the 1400s. And we'll talk about why later. But it's kind of boom or golden era in terms of that bastion star fortification was the 1600s. And when you look at the population numbers of the 1600s, it's quite surprising because Ming China had between 60 and 150 million. India, the Mughal Empire, 56.
Okay, I'm not sure what the point here is, but look, the Holy Roman Empire. You're talking about most of Europe, most of Western Europe for sure, being between 27 and 30. Let's call it 30 million people. That's less than half the population of France today. How many of these people would have been skilled and able-bodied enough to be in the labor force?
34 million people. The population numbers aren't that small when you go back to the 1600s. In England, if you needed 50,000 people to do manual labor, that's 1% of your population. So I don't see the population being a problem with these numbers.
Well, if we're going with what they're teaching at the prestigious universities in communist China, the West has fabricated all this history. So what you showed is a lie. And I think we need to be more open-minded to what communist China is trying to teach us about history right now.
Yeah, communist China sort of says that China's the backbone to all history, the oldest history and the most advanced, and the West.
That's correct.
Yeah.
We need to be a bit more respectful So I'd appreciate it if you didn't cherry pick and you also highlighted that information.
Okay, cherry picking, yeah. Bad game, that.
At least Putin would be happy that we're using, the Soviet Union's accomplishments with that canal as an example of how manual construction is very possible. It's really worth emphasizing as well, when you get close up and in these star fort or bastion fort structures, you realize that the masonry, the brickwork, the masonry.
Some of the masonry, mate. Some of the masonry. A lot of the masonry is top class. Man, I've visited a lot of these sites. Okay, I've seen a lot of rough filled walls, but capstones, edging, these guys,
It's not
cornerstones.
it's not the same as a medieval cathedral, which
Just bear with me, I'll show you somewhere else, somewhere that I can speak from experience. Is this place, Brouage? Nice little star here in just to west of me. There's only a small part of it has masonry on this part here, and I can tell you that these slabs are beautifully produced. They've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's at least 7 faces on these. They are cut beautifully. The angle changes on the top surface. So no, this is only like that. It's only a tiny bit of one that was that did have masonry, and nothing. It was nothing compared to the one that you have on screen at the moment.
the stone carvings are far more impressive. A lot of the masonry with the star forts is very basic. Sometimes it's rubble masonry. Most of the time it's just brick. You'll see.
No, it's not the masonry. You're confusing the masonry and the construction. And again, just saying it's just brick. Bear with me.
Brick. It's not refined like the cathedrals and sculpted and carved. They're quite basic. And
look at the scale of them. Will you please look at the scale of them? And you just call that basic? They are completely off the scale, and you've got the balls to call them basic. You're so offline here. Bear with me. Again, I apologize. This is going on way too long. Okay. This is I've covered this before, but not many people watch my videos, so I'm sorry to have to go through this again. This is the Citadel of Lille. This was called the Queen of Citadels. This knocks Bourtange for 6. We have a point-to-point distance of over 300 meters here. So Bourtange in its entirety would probably fit within the star. Bourtange in its entirety would fit in there, and Leah's outer works go on. Let me just highlight what was involved here. 60 million bricks. 60 million bricks, which is 4 times more than the largest brick structure in the States, which also happens to be a star fort in Florida with its 16 million bricks. This is 60 million bricks. On top of that, 3,300,000 cut stone blocks and 60,000 sandstone piers. This is huge scale. It's nothing simple. There's nothing simple to this. This is incredible structure. Okay, I agree. It mightn't be to the quality of a cathedral, but it is so many times bigger than a cathedral. And on top of that, what never gets counted here in Lille is the rest of it. Lille would have been surrounded all the way around the ring road here, as with so many cities, all the way around here would have been like Copenhagen. There's some of it here that we can still see today. Look at that. All this brickwork on top of the 60 million bricks that went into the citadel. You had the whole city surrounded by even more brickwork. I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to guess just how much. Let me just show you though. Turn off the. So if you can see this, this is the citadel. This is the 60 million bricks, and the 3 million whatever stone blocks, but they didn't count this. How much do you think went into that? Looks like about 3 times what that was. Seriously, I mean, look at this stuff. Okay.
That's why I recommend as well going to Sacred Geometry Decoded's channel, because he's breaking down all these old world building techniques and showing you how it's done and showing you how it's possible. And this guy's not clocking in as many views as he should be for what he's presenting, because it goes against the grain of this ancient aliens, lost high technology propaganda all the time.
Okay, again, I'm not on the ancient aliens, high-tech propaganda agenda, whatever. My thing is that the foundations of all our cities are stars, that they have been, if you like, a symbiotic relationship between the star and man over the years. They have been decorated, they have been, but the foundations have been here long before the cities that appeared on top of them.
Arterian propaganda. This doesn't mean that there aren't secrets or an abundance of hidden history relating to these bastion forts. So I did a video on secret military engineering as part of these Shadow Rome videos I was doing. And again, I mean, come on, like, who guards pretty much all of the secrets of our world? It's the high up military industrial complex. And I'm sure that a lot of bastion forts were used as deep underground military bases, you know, and they're just a surface we're seeing. But the thing is, a lot of historians ask the question today, you know, why do...
Sorry, that just going back, that's a good point there. This Jaromer in the Czech Republic, it's fairly spectacular. It's nice. It has Some nice extended bits here on the other side of, excuse me, on the other side of the river. But underneath this is 44 kilometers of tunnels on 3 levels. So this again indicates to me that this existed before this town did, that this town was built on top of this structure. I've gone into this slightly before on other videos, but it looks like I'm going to have to go into it again. We'll go on with this and try and
We
wrap
have
this
sovereign
up
states.
soon.
Why do we have centralized political powers? Why was the West able to conquer and transform much of the rest of the world, dominating the Americas, Indias, Africa? How did a small and historically backward area like Europe end up controlling the majority of the world? And the answer is star forts. Star forts are the beginning of centralized power and domination. They began in the Renaissance in Italy, a country obsessed with the notion of Rome. And
Saying where they began is not good because we don't have proof of where they actually began. And like that, all towns and cities seem to be on one. So, yeah, of course they're really important. They're really important, and we've got to understand why.
Expensive to build. Bastion forts were the beginning of a military revolution that led to the centralized and hierarchical dominant power structure that we find ourselves in today. It was literally the birth of centralized state power, because before you had feudal lords that could be very powerful in different certain regions, but as warfare grew into a huge economy, all the fiscal, all the economic administration, financing these wars and armies were collected into the hands of the head of state, say the king. And this is why there's so many wars from the 1400s to the 1800s. It was a huge business, and that's how the heads of state grew more powerful.
Yeah, and can you imagine the expense of all this? I did one of my first videos on star forts was about how much they cost, and it's just insane that countries that are pumping all the resources into war are spending money on building insane fortifications that are well beyond what you would need.
Literally no evidence. It's just speculation and pareidolia. It's the same thing in believing in Santa. And I do genuinely believe that things like ancient aliens and the Tartarian hypothesis was designed, as a trap for those that are questioning the current narrative and to make us all look a bit stupid and ridiculous, to get us to erase our history in favor of sci-fi and mock our military past and replace it with the new age dogma of free energy. These thoughts.
So, yeah. I've got absolutely no loyalty to the military past. I don't think it's anything to be celebrated.
Are not mystical energy sites. It's very evident that they are carefully designed trenches, moats, and walls for defense. And we built a glorious one in the 1980s.
That's an engineer's
why
feat.
Aewar is annoying, because it's like he's not doing any real research. He's
doesn't-
latching on these little
he's
details that mean nothing.
Oh, sorry, I forgot a very important line that he said there.
Free energy. These forts are not mystical energy sites.
Get it back to normal speed. Listen carefully to what he says.
It's very evident that they are carefully designed trenches, moats, and walls for defense. And we built a glorious one in the 1980s.
We built a glorious one in the 1980s. We built a glorious one in the 1980s. This one. Okay. I'm going to cut it there. I don't think I've got anything else to say to you. Maybe just to back things, to give a bit more. Here's another one just to show you. Okay, this is Bluetown on the Isle of Sheppey, UK, which is not far from London. Have a look at it here. There's again, these things are huge. Look at the trucks by comparison. This is just a little detail here. It goes up here, around here, and would have gone around here. Let's have a look at it from before view, historical imagery. Take it back to 1940. Clearer to see it. Okay, this is what's happening. Even in 1960, it was okay, clearly visible. 1985, can't see a damn thing. 1990, most of it is gone. A lot of concrete poured, and ever shrinking. Today, a few traces. These things are being wiped out more than the ones that are being restored. Oh yeah, yeah, I don't doubt that. Where are we? One last one for the road. Here we go. Okay, it's not this part. It's this part. Okay, this one. Nice design. It's have a look at the. This is very recently restored. Okay, there it is in 2005, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2018. A lot of excavators were used restoring this site, and this is how it looks today. But sorry, it was there before. It was under yeah, it was there before, as was the rest of it. So that's another restoration. Doesn't mean that it was built recently. It was restored. Big difference there. Yeah. Okay, so that's all I think I've got for you today. I'm sorry it's so long. I don't like doing long videos. I don't expect anybody to actually watch this through, but I will do some shorter stuff again, and I wish you all the best. Thank you. Goodbye.